Hey there, I am so glad that you're here. I'm Priscilla. Welcome to The Chat. This is the place where we just kind of, chat about things in our lives, things that matter. Today is an important conversation because we're going to be talking about something that a lot of people just kind of hold inside, hold in their hearts and in their own minds, and they don't really talk about it. They're not really open and honest about the way they're feeling. We're going to talk about grief. What do you do when you really have experienced a traumatic loss? One that has left a hole in your heart, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to recover from that and move forward in health and wholeness. We're going to talk to a couple people today whose stories really will touch your heart, and I have a feeling there are going to be so many of you that are able to relate specifically to what they say. So you're going to want to stay tuned, grab a fresh cup of coffee or whatever your favorite drink is, pull up a chair, and let's chat. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Priscilla, and we're going to have a great conversation today, one that I think is so important. In fact, we've already been having this conversation. This is part 2 of a talk that we've been having that's really important, and you need to go view episode 1 if you have not, because we've been talking about grief and really how it can cripple you and keep you from moving forward when you've had a traumatic loss in your life. And we're going to keep that conversation going today. We have been talking to Denise Madison. Would you please welcome her again to our program? She has quite a little story, and I want you to just tell us, just in a nutshell, what we've already talked about in episode 1. Just tell us what happened, what the loss was.
Absolutely. My husband was murdered, so it's our 5 children and I just kind of going through and allowing the Lord to speak to us through that tragedy.
Yeah, and so 5 children and 1 on the way.
And 1 on the way.
1 on the way. You found out about this baby 2 weeks after you buried your husband, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And speaking of babies, I have a sweet friend with me. Her name is Angie Smith. You might be already familiar with her, but would you please help me to welcome Angie Smith to the program as well? I'm so glad you're here, Angie.
I'm honored to be here.
Yes, and you have experienced a little bit of a loss in your life, a big loss in your life as well. How long ago? First of all, tell me how long it's been now.
It's funny to say. Because people ask, and then all of a sudden you'll say a number, and you're like, has it been that long?
Yeah.
She would have turned 7 last month. Audrey would have been
7
7.
years old.
It feels so, yeah.
Tell us about that journey you walked. What happened, and how are you doing today?
Well, and it's a neat thing to have, because I do feel like we're sort of in lots of ways at different ends of the spectrum.
It's a spectrum,
both from the loss and the time and the way, but a lot of our questions are still the same about who God is. And so I'm grateful to be able to sit with you, and I so enjoyed listening to you, and had to redo my makeup right before I came out here. It was such a blessing. So yes, it was a very different loss, but my husband and I already had 3 daughters, and we were expecting our 4th, and it's just one of those, went into an ultrasound and everyone was like, are you finally having a boy? I mean, that was the only thing, we didn't have any reason to believe anything was wrong. And I was about 20 weeks along, and right away it was just, I could tell from the technician's face, something is really wrong. Mm-hmm. And so, to make a long story short, we found out that Audrey had several conditions that made her what they called incompatible with life, which they urged us to have an abortion the following day. They thought the best thing was to terminate. And we just really prayed about it and felt like the Lord wanted us to carry her, and so we did. And as long as we could. And when I delivered her on April 7th, 2008, she lived for about 2.5 hours. So we got to hold her and spend time with her, and even all during the pregnancy, the girls were really already then thinking of her as a sister. And it made me think of that when you were talking about being pregnant, that her children are seeing this, and it's amazing, the children's comprehension of what is coming. Yeah. And so even from very early on, they were anticipating a sister and grieved along with us when we lost her.
And you're right, there is a spectrum here that is represented by the 2 of you. One of you has lost an adult, a spouse, and the other of you a child. And to help us sort of wade through these waters of grief, and then also try to figure out some practical steps for wherever you may be on that spectrum of walking out of it, is a counselor who's going to just really dig in deep and help us to get some questions answered. So would you guys please help me to welcome him? He's Dr. David Walley. Help me to welcome him to the program. I want to ask you a little bit about this spectrum. I would assume that grief is grief, but is there a difference in the way you grieve or the way you feel about the loss when it is a child versus a spouse or an adult?
Absolutely. And it's interesting listening to these two ladies at different points along the way. Even the way they tell their stories, you can tell they're in two very different places. Yes, one was a husband, one was a child, but the timing in their case is what seems so strikingly different. You can tell here is a story where she's claiming strength. Here's a story where she's lived the strength through many years, and that spectrum will become her reality, but it's going to take a while.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think, Doctor, that time heals, or is it what you do with the time that will determine whether or not you heal?
That's a really interesting question. I think that God uses time to heal us, but I think that one of the things that fascinates me most about grief is that grief is often described as a lot of emotions, and sometimes we get bogged down in one of those emotions. We get angry, we get hurt, we're afraid, we're confused, and if we wrestle with those emotions with God rather than get stuck in those emotions, what happens is we move from our human temporal perspective to God's perspective, and that's where the healing really happens.
Yep.
But that does require some time.
Yeah.
That wrestling requires some time. So I do think that time is part of the process, but God gave time its properties, and He gives us the time to heal.
Yep. Angie, I want to know what the wrestling looked like, and I mean in those 2 hours that you were holding this child in your arms, knowing that you had limited time. What did that literally look like for you and your husband? And then in the days following, how were you able to sort of go through that wrestling match with God and sort of work your way out of it instead of getting stuck in it?
The hours that we had her were so peaceful. And I say that I'm not a courageous person. I'm overly emotional. But I feel like the Lord gave us that day. So the wrestling was sort of the before. It was, and you do a better job of describing the steps, but there was this sort of like, when you're coming to terms with what's happening, there's a grief that happens there and a wrestling. And I can remember being pregnant, and a few days after her diagnosis, I was at a baby shower for one of my dear friends. And I remember us hugging on the way out and our stomachs pushing up against each other. And, the whole time we'd been praying for her to have a healthy baby, but everyone in the room knew what was going on with me. And so everyone just sort of started crying, because it was like, how do you...
This dichotomy.
Yeah, how do we do this, right? And so that day on the way home from that, I'll just never forget. And it was raining and I was driving home. And I remember literally screaming at the top of my lungs and pounding on my steering wheel and saying, you can fix this. Fix this. So there was that wrestling.
Yeah.
Which is there's still time, I always think of the story of Lazarus when I think of this, because there comes that point after he's dead and they were like, but he's sick.
But
can you come right now? He's sick. Like there's still, And so, and then again, even after, so it was like while we had her. Then after, it was a different wrestling of now how do we deal with that. And so, I loved something that you said, and I feel like that's been my experience too, is that over and over again, the Lord has had to say to me, I am not intimidated by your emotions. So you're mad, you're devastated, I'm God, so I actually know that, okay? Like you can make up a pretty prayer and say it to me and I still know your heart. So how about you just scream if you need to in the car, but you just bring it to my feet? Can we just do that? Just include me in it.
Authenticity.
Yeah. And I needed that. Like, I think there's that part of us that wants to, and I'm sure we've all struggled with that. I talk to God and there's a part of me that wants to edit what I'm saying. And, and then I feel like the Lord really used that wrestling before and after to sort of say, that's not what I've asked of you. I asked you to include me in it, but you're human and you're wrapped in flesh and you're going to experience these things. So, yeah.
What do you think would be the first step? If someone were sitting on your couch, which these ladies are, right? We all are. We're sitting on your couch.
This is my couch.
It is now.
Couch.
It is now.
Yeah, it is. And in fact, this is your show. We need you to talk to us for the rest of the
We're just going to relax for the rest
That's
of it.
exactly
and listen
right.
to you.
I want to know what would be, if you gave someone the first step to getting out of the pit of grief that could cripple them, what would be sort of the first thing? Do this starting today.
I usually ask people to tell me their story. Just tell me the story, like you had Denise do. Tell me the story. I think a lot of people, and I hear this many, many times, when a person has lost, particularly a child, they're afraid people are going to forget the child. And so I ask them to tell me the story, because it's a way of imprinting that story in their brain as if it's not already imprinted, but it's passing it along to another person. And I tell them, I'm going to carry that story with you. So I ask them to tell the story. I want to hear the story. I want to know about this. I want to know about the experience.
Okay, now let me ask a question with that in mind, because I think part of the hard part about being in relationship with someone who has had a loss in your life, if you're friends with that person, you're not exactly sure if you're supposed to ask them about it. You're not exactly sure. You're kind of walking on eggshells.
Right.
So as a friend of someone who's experiencing this, would you suggest that it is kind of out on the floor in conversation, that we do let them know we're a safe place to tell the story again and again if they need to? Or are we supposed to just wait until they want to open up about that?
I think inviting is always a proper thing to do. There are always the kinds of two ways of communicating. You know, lots of things we hear about communicating, but there are two ways: demanding and inviting. And I don't ever want to demand that somebody tell me their story. That could be interfering in their privacy. But inviting them to tell me their story, I always want them to feel free to tell me their story, even if they need to tell me again.
Yeah.
That's part of the process for them until they don't need to tell it anymore for a while.
Yeah.
And we may go and work on some other things, and then they come back and they need to tell me the story again.
Yep.
So I do think that's true. There are people, because of my position in the office, I probably have more freedom to ask people to tell me their story.
Right.
People I don't know.
Right.
But they've walked in with a kind of trust. But on the street, I might not ask those people to tell me their story because I haven't earned the right.
Yeah.
It's the invasion of that kind of privacy. But if I could just add this one other thing, part of telling the story, and this is a very uncomfortable way to phrase this, I've never figured out another way. We have pallbearers. It's not something we do a lot at funerals anymore. We don't really carry the casket. But bearing the pall is part of that experience, is feeling the weight of the lifelessness.
Wow.
And telling the story is a way of bearing the pall. And so I become a pallbearer with them. I carry the feeling of the weight of what's missing. The person that used to be here is not here anymore. I want to carry that with you.
Isn't that an interesting way to look at that? And I think really overall, that's sort of what friendship should be. It should be us bearing one another, one of those
bear up
burdens.
under the weight.
Yeah, and kind of helping them with that journey. We're going to talk more about how we can do that, and about, I'm very interested to talk to these ladies about some of the things people said or did when they were in the midst of that pain that were not wise things to do or say. I think that could help all of us to just be able to be responsible and be helpful in these circumstances and relationships. So we'll be right back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. If you're feeling discouraged and defeated, if you're a bit overwhelmed or maybe even feeling undone, if you're wondering whether or not your future has any hope of victory, then listen, this Bible study is for you. Strongholds are torn down by the Word of God. Fortresses are dismantled by the Word of God. When you place faith in Jesus Christ, the righteousness of Christ is credited to your spiritual bank account. That you are the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus. I invite you to join me for a lesson in putting on the full armor of God. Our lives are going to be changed, yours and mine, because we're going to learn that we've got the victory in Jesus' name. Hey there. Welcome back. We are doing some healing today on the program and talking about how you can make sure that you're not stuck in a place of grief, no matter why that grief is coming to your life. We've talking to 3 incredible people, 2 of which have experienced some loss in their lives, and they've been kind enough to share their story with us. And I want to know from you 2 ladies, both of you, I want to know if you went through a phase of being, and you've kind of already described this a little bit, but being plain old flat out mad, just straight up mad at God, mad at the situation. How were you able to get a little softening back in your heart after just being angry?
Do you want to go? Go for it.
Do you have any thoughts? Okay, I was going to say, it sort of goes back to what I said before, but that I was so, I sort of felt like I needed to edit that. And a lot of good came from reading things like Psalms, where you're like, there's emotion in this, and you're reading people who are angry, you know, and they're like, why is this happening? And so for me, I finally realized, oh, okay, I can feel this. I can't get stuck here. It's okay for me to feel this. And again, just to own it for what it was. Yeah. To say, I think the more time I spent trying to act like I wasn't angry, it would pile up. And then finally, when I was like, no, I'm
pretty upset.
Yeah, and I'm mad at you, God.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't know what to do with that. There was something healthy that came, and a shift in my relationship with him, and the way that I saw him as a father. And so, I don't know about you. Have you had moments like that yet? It's early for you, so I don't know what.
I have. One moment in particular kind of stands out. I had, by far to this point, the darkest day. And what kind of struck me was that God asked something extremely hard of both of us that night. And I kind of got to a place where I felt like he asked the harder thing of me. And I'm just being very frank and honest right now. Because I felt like, you know, my husband is now face to face with Jesus. Yeah. You know, but I'm here and I am aching. And I kind of got a little bit of like, Lord, I am suffering, and my husband is face to face with you, and you know this is a hard thing. And when people come and say to me, "Oh, I'm just, you know, I'm so blessed by your story, and it's just really touched me," and I would say, Lord, why is my pain? I'm glad for them. That's fantastic, but I'm the one that lives this ache. Our children, his parents, were the ones that are living with this ache. And what happened as a result of that, like I said, it was a true day of just being in despair and agony, and felt, you know, forsaken, to be honest with you. And I felt like the next day, God helped me to see something, and that was that he gave me that as a gift, my experiencing that, so that I might be able to partake in the suffering of Christ, so that I could be more like him. And for me, I can tell you that the second day, the one day was so very dark, but the day that God said, that was my gift to you, so that you might understand a little bit better the suffering that Christ endured on your behalf.
Yeah. I think that there is a lot of freedom in listening to you guys talk. I'm just thinking about the freedom that comes over someone when they realize that asking the why question is not sin. Like, it's not like you're on the wrong side of the relationship with God just because you want to know why. Yeah. And most of the time we're not going to get an answer, but why, David, would you say it is important to know you're free to go to God authentically, upset and all, and ask that why question? Because I think a lot of people don't.
Why is it important to be able to ask why?
Yeah.
Because
to let that out and be authentic.
We don't like not knowing.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds pretty simple, but we don't like not knowing. And you mentioned earlier, Angie, you said there was this moment where you said, you can fix this. And that's what anger demands. Anger says something has to happen. And that's when we go to God and say, why? And he doesn't necessarily come back and tell us why.
Right. And that's
one of the things that starts happening is he starts transforming us. I think that one of the things that we get caught up in grief is, so what do we do? What are the steps? When really God is doing stuff in us in the grieving process that we're not aware of, that we're not participants in. He is constantly healing us in the grief process without us doing anything.
So when is grieving, this is an interesting thought. The process is important. That's what you've just said. When do you know you've crossed the line into an unhealthy state of grieving? When it's no longer a healthy, beneficial process, but it is smothering you and you're not moving forward. How does someone know when they've crossed that boundary?
That's a great question. One of the things I think you have to look at is time and relationships. I usually tell people when a significant loss has happened, you've lost a daughter, you've lost a husband, it's going to take at least a year. You have to go through the anniversaries. This was the day that we got married. This is the first birthday without him. Father's Day is coming up. And you have to go through the anniversary of the event where he lost his life. All of those events, you have to go through those. And then it's not the first time again. Mm-hmm. You kind of wonder, am I going to make it through the first Christmas? So you begin to look at time. So time is a factor there. Another thing is, am I destroying other relationships around me because I'm not allowing those relationships to help me be pointed to God? Am I not allowing those relationships to comfort me? Am I not allowing those relationships to be healing in my life? Am I being destructive toward them? So I like to look at time, and I like to look at the relationships around them.
That's good.
And when anger turns to bitterness, that's another.
How do you detect that?
How do you detect
How
that?
do you detect when anger has become bitterness?
When bitterness anger tends to be more acute. I am angry with you because you did this. Bitterness is my outlook at the world is
just
nothing's
seeping
going to
into
work out
everything.
right. Everything is bad. It's not going to be good.
That's
It's just
great.
going to be bad from here on out.
Okay.
And that sometimes gets pointed at somebody, but most of the time it's just generalized.
Okay. So if you're just a mean person, then you know that anger has taken root and it's become a little bit of bitterness.
You could
Okay.
have saved us a lot of time.
Yeah.
If you're mean, if you're angry and upset. Okay, so I want to know, what are the worst things that some people did? They thought they were being helpful, they
Yeah.
thought they were being kind, they thought they were saying something that should have been a blessing in your life,
Should have
but
been.
you just really wanted to smack them upside
I
their
did
head.
I did.
You did smack people. Yeah.
But I felt
Please
that.
tell us, help us, because people that are friends of folks that are really going
Yeah.
through some tough stuff, you're really kind of walking on eggshells because you're
Right.
not quite sure what to say or what to do or not do. So could you tell us what just didn't work for you and then what did?
Yeah. Okay, we talked a little bit about this before we even came out here because it's funny how I do think most of the time the heart is to help. I mean, their motive is not wrong. They want to.
Intentions are good.
Absolutely. And listen, grief is hard. And so stepping into someone else's grief is super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so they want to make you feel better, but they also want to make themselves feel better. I mean, they just want to feel like they did something that fixed you and fixed them. And so instead of like, I just want to sit in this grief with you and wrestle with it, people will try to, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
So some of the things that I heard frequently were that God needed another angel in heaven. I really struggled with that. I've talked to a lot of people who
you've
have
heard that
lost
before,
children,
right?
and that's
Yeah,
one that I
they've
hear a
lost
lot.
children. Okay. That
No.
doesn't work for you.
No,
Yeah.
no,
Okay.
and actually it doesn't work for anything theologically. So it's not just me. It's actually just
Doesn't
not. It's not
really work
accurate.
for God.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So the other one that doesn't really work for God that I heard a lot was Satan took your baby.
You heard that?
Oh, I hear it all the time. All the time.
So
like
it was
he
a
won,
demonic attack.
Basically,
He won.
This wasn't God. God wouldn't do that to you because again, in people's brains, it's like I need to believe that God is good and Satan is evil, and so if something bad happens,
So it's easier to compartmentalize
Sure.
it, good and evil.
I'll put that on him. And so, we were talking about like, how do you respond to that? And it's hard, and you wrestle with it because sometimes there are people who are coming to you and saying, I lost my baby, but I know that Satan I knew that this wasn't God. And it's hard to wrestle through that. But theologically, at the end of the day, you're like, how do you find hope in a world where you feel like Satan can trump God? This isn't healthy. It's not biblically accurate. So
You got that right.
Did God want this?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Did he grieve with me? Yes. That night in a hospital room, when I handed my daughter to a nurse and watched her walk out of the room, and I'm pounding on every single button wanting to get her back, and the only thing I could say was like, you have to be with him because I have nothing else.
Yeah.
I believe he grieved that loss with me. So no, he didn't want it. But ultimately,
He's in control.
I only find peace knowing he had the final say.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I can rest in that. And so that was one of the comments that I heard a lot. And then a lot of times I heard, for me, because it was a child, one that is a really common, well, you have 3 other healthy, beautiful children, And again, the effort is like, let's look on the bright side.
Would it have been better for them just to be quiet?
But people don't want to be.
They feel like they have to fill the silence with something instead of just being there.
Right, and I will say, the month after Audrey died, and people who followed my story know that my nephew, he died the next month at 10 weeks of age of SIDS. And so they're buried together. My sister-in-law was holding her newborn healthy child and singing over Audrey as she was buried. And I remember us looking at each other and thinking, why does God choose? And of course we had no idea. So a month later, now I'm on the other side. And I just remember driving to Georgia and sitting in front of her and realizing.
Angie, I didn't know that. I didn't know that close timing there with those babies.
Yeah. And so I get being on the other side because my tendency, even having just gone through it, was to
fill the silence.
So I get it, I really
help.
do.
Yeah.
But you read about Job and his friends, and it says at one point they came and sat with him in his sorrow.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes that's awkward,
But
and
just
it's
sit.
not coming up with answers, it's just sitting.
Well, I think that's a freeing comment for a lot of us, that we just need to know that sitting is just good. Just sit there and wait for sometimes you're sitting there is the invitation they need to know. You're the safe place where they can open up and talk about what's on their heart. What about for you? Anything people did that just, or are doing still, because it's only been 4 months. Is there anything that it grates on your nerves when you hear it or see it done?
Absolutely. So a few that I'll mention. One of the things, and again, David, you might say that this is something that time will change, but I really am not interested in anyone talking to me about 10 years from now. So when someone says, you'll see 10 years from now, the smiles on the faces, and when the babies, no, there's no amount of time that's going to make the loss okay. Now, do I believe that it's true that I will learn to live with the ache, and I will learn to have strength, day by day? Absolutely, and I believe that's true. And Angie's sitting here, and that's proof that that's the case. However,
but when someone says 10 years from now you'll get it, what that communicates is get over it already.
Sure,
that
absolutely.
Communicates let's get on with your life
the
already.
loss isn't going to go away.
Yeah,
it absolutely isn't. So I think that's a really big one, and I think one of the others is just kind of in general when people will say to me, and this is very unique to our situation, but when they'll say, yeah, but you have a baby. It's similar to what you're saying about the 3 children. Yeah, but you have a baby, but you have a piece of Corey, but you have, every time you see your children's faces, it's the same. It's along the same line. It doesn't replace the loss. It doesn't change things. So I am completely in agreement with you. Just sitting with you and letting you cry and letting you just kind of be. And I will tell you, one of the things that I appreciate, and it's kind of to your point about acknowledging. I had a friend. So yesterday was my birthday.
Happy birthday, friend.
Oh, thank you. But I had a friend, and I had lots of people that were there, but one person just came up to me and sat right next to me. She put her hand on my knee and she said, I am so blessed to be here and to celebrate your birthday, but I just want you to know I'm sorry that Corey's not.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
it meant the world to me.
So this is what that sounds like to me. Acknowledging the loss and not trying to minimize the loss is the key to being appropriate with someone who has experienced this. Is that sound about right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think the other side of it is, and I think as you get people, like, again, it's the eggshells thing. For me, it was always more comfortable when they would bring it up. And a lot of people say, what do I say to my friend? I'm going to go to the hospital, she's lost, and I'm like, ask her what the baby's fingers look like. Ask her
Ask her about the baby.
If the baby was old enough to, what was his personality? What was he? People, I think, in wanting to help, will tend to not bring it up, when what we want is the chance to, what you said, to tell our story.
Yeah. Final words for us. what would you share to someone who really right now is trying to figure out a way to get out of this? How would you encourage them?
I don't want this to sound trite at all. And to your point, I really do understand that the 10 years down the line, that's not a conversation to have right now. But the wrestling, grieving is hope because you're fighting.
It's
Grieving is hope. And there is coming a day when people who've lost will realize that God is in control. And as the scripture says, there is no darkness in God. God is light, and in him is no dark at all. So everything that God does is good and right, even those things he allows. There are things in my own life. I'm not the story here today, but there are things in my life that I don't understand. But if I can't walk out of here knowing that God is in control and that he's good, I'm going to hang up my sign, lock up my door, and go home. Pull the covers over my head and
What are
give
we
up.
all doing, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
What are we doing
all
this for?
Yeah.
But there is coming a day when those two things will settle in our hearts and our perspective changes from this temporal place to God's perspective. It's coming.
I can't think of a better note to end on. Could you? Yep. Would you guys please help me to thank them for being here today and thank them for sharing themselves with us?